Hey everyone, welcome to Headline, the show that's yesterday's news. For a while now, I've explored my love of history, and it's been a struggle finding just the right name for our channel. But I came up with something rather perfect, and it's very good to be back. New York City, the booming metropolis, was less than happy when war broke out between the states. Losing the South as a trading companion seemed disastrous, both for the financial market as well as industrial. At the time, cotton was extremely profitable, making up over 40% of the industrial material finding its way to port. Everyone knows that war began in 1861, but what's rarely discussed is the back alley conversations of northern townsfolk, especially in the Big Apple itself. Many people thought that joining the South and seceding from the Union was the best way to protect New York's business interests. With the Confederacy, which included slavery, the transfer of enslaved people became illegal in 1808, but the city's underground market of forcibly acquiring African labor kept moving right along. There was money to be made. As the war marched on, as brothers and cousins met on opposing sides of the battlefield, newspapers were quick to explain the replacement theory to the white working class. It was one of the first times the term had ever been used. Many of their readers were descendants of Irish and German settlers. They were told that emancipation would surely lead to folks losing their livelihood to a labor force of newly freed people. Those words sparked a flood of anger and fear. Most workers had families. Those families had mouths to feed. Children needed clothes on their backs. In March of 1863, the North faced a shortage of manpower. Congress passed the Enrollment Act, bringing with it a national draft of Northern males. Nothing like it had ever been done before. The draft targeted unmarried men between the ages of 20 and 35 and married males between 35 and 45. The names of all able-bodied men were introduced into a lottery of sorts. News began to spread that any man could opt out if, and only if, another took his place. For those wealthy individuals with money to burn, a $300 payment to the war effort would be all it took for the government to forget you ever existed. That's over $7,000 by today's standards. In a world where some of the most common jobs, like masonry, paid up to $2 a day, the price was way too high. The average man would soon be suiting up for battle. With the exception of freed black men living in the North, most were former slaves who'd escaped the plantation. These men were not seen as citizens and not eligible to serve. There had been a rising tension between freed black workers and white citizens since the 1850s as competition increased for the low-wage jobs at the docks. Rioting over the new draft occurred in Michigan and Massachusetts, but New York suffered the most after northern newspapers began screaming about the melee, thereby increasing the anger of Irish workers. On July 13, 1863, a crowd of about 500 people attacked the 9th District Provost office where the draft lottery was taking place. The workers had a game plan, and they wasted no time heaving large rocks through the windows and breaking down the doors. It didn't take long before the building erupted into flames. When the fire department showed up, rioters unleashed their wrath upon their horse-drawn vehicles, flipping them over and injuring the animals. Telegraph lines were severed to keep word of the attack from getting out. The New York Police Department, which had only been in service for about 20 years, got wind of it. They quickly dispatched to stop the riot. Chief John Kennedy, an Irish immigrant himself, arrived on the scene. He wasn't in uniform, but the crowd immediately recognized him. Kennedy was pelted with bottles, chains, sticks, basically anything the crowd could get their hands on. He was beaten unconscious with a busted lip, a bruised face, and injured eyes. Some folks even brought knives. As the chief was covered in blood, doctors would later count over 70 stab wounds. He survived, but was never the same after that. The riot spread across the city, but police were able to keep folks out of lower Manhattan. Nothing was safe. 44th Street's Bullhead Hotel was set ablaze. It's rumored that they'd refused to serve alcohol to the angry citizens, and it was time for a little bit of payback. Even the office of the New York Times was targeted, but the crowd was turned back by employees on the roof, armed with Gatling guns. Numerous black people were beaten and lynched just for being on the streets. The wrong place at the wrong time. The Colored Orphan Asylum on Fifth Avenue, housing over 200 children, was attacked by the angry mob. However, police were able to rescue them before the building burned to the ground. It's said that by 4 p.m., rioters numbered in the thousands, including women and their children. It rained that night heavily, sending angry folks home to simmer down a little bit, but they returned the following day, torching more houses, including that of Mary Burke, a known prostitute popular for catering to black clients. Governor Horatio Seymour was ushered in. His words attempted to calm the crowd, assuring them that a draft of any kind was unconstitutional. He was buying time, however, as General John E. Wool snuck in over 800 soldiers. Everyone took a deep breath and began to relax a little on July 15th, when Robert Nugent, an assistant provost marshal, got word from his superiors to slow down and maybe even postpone the riot. Now, as newspapers began to alert the public, some rioters agreed to bow out. For them, it was over. As a precaution, though, over 4,000 federal troops were brought in as a show of force. These regiments had participated in the Battle of Gettysburg. They were battle-hardened and would have no trouble soothing any angry temper still willing to take up the cause. By the stroke of midnight of July 16th, the riots were done. Some say that 119 lives were lost, but scholars would later put the number of casualties to over 1,200. When it was all said and done, news of the draft and the $300 buyout caused over $1 million in property damage and a sudden homelessness to an estimated 3,000 black families who began to wonder. In 1860, the census recorded over 12,000 freed black residents. In 1865, after the riot, their numbers dwindled down to a bit over 9,000. If you'd like to learn more, there's many books on the subject, namely The Second Rebellion, the story of the New York draft riots, written by James McAgue. Did you know that the Colored Orphanage wanted to rebuild their children's home after the riot ended? But New Yorkers wouldn't stand for that. They totally rejected the idea, demanding that the children be relocated to an unsettled land outside the city. That land rose to become known as Harlem. And abolitionists took a bit of time to reintroduce their movement in New York after those dark days. In 1864, a year after the melee, the Big Apple welcomed the first all-black Union regiment with a grand parade. Thanks for watching Headline, the show that's yesterday's news.